Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Want more energy? We'll take a look at your emotional power with our guest, Dr. Julia DiGangi. Dr. DiGangi, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Bill. I'm thrilled to be here.
Now, it was fun before the show because we were talking, you've written a book, Energy Rising, and those words, obviously, that's what we all want. And you start out and say, you talk about emotional power. What's the role? What is emotional power, and what is the role of emotional power?
Phenomenal question. So I want to back up a little bit and sort of talk about your brain. So your brain is moving you through your life largely based on emotion. Okay. So if you think about the most powerful questions in your life, do I have a good life? Do I have enough time? Do I have enough money? Should I stay in the marriage? Should I leave the job? All of these questions are ultimately mediated by your feeling. I don't know if you had a good life. You got to tell me how you feel about it. I don't know if you have enough money. How do you feel about it, right? So it's actually emotion that is sort of fundamentally giving rise to our experience of our life. Now, there's a ton of emotions out there. We have a gazillion words, right? Happy, sad, frustrated, irritated, stressed, overwhelmed. I like to really simplify things. And I like to say there's sort of two fundamental types of emotion. There's emotional pain and there's emotional power. So emotional pain is any sensation that feels bad. I feel stressed. I feel angry. I feel inadequate. I feel scared. So our emotional power is about how willing we are to confront these experiences of emotional pain. In other words, everything in my life that I want, that I cannot quite get, is on the other side of these feelings I can't feel. So let me give you an example. Let's say I want more self-confidence. Who doesn't want more self-confidence? The thing that's very sort of counterintuitive for people to realize is if I want more confidence, I'm going to need to come into a new relationship. I'm going to have to confront these painful feelings of self-doubt. The only way I get to greater empowerment in terms of confidence is for me to have a new relationship with, for example, the feeling of self-doubt, which always feels bad. So it's really when we're able to work more effectively with our bad feelings that we become much more powerful.
If I understand your book correctly, you mentioned that when we're talking about emotional power, it's easy to expend tremendous energy yanking at ineffective levers of change. So it sounds like a lot of us are going in the wrong direction. Can you put that in our kind of language?
Absolutely. So I think what happens when we feel, let's say we feel frustrated with our job situation, or we feel, let's take social media. Many people find that very frustrating. So I go onto social media and I get super frustrated by the comments on social media. And then I keep going back to social media. I start arguing in the comment section. I get off the computer and I go and I talk to my husband about how annoying people are. Can they believe this? So in other words, I'm trying to resolve, at the core of what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to resolve my feeling of frustration, right? I'm trying to feel better. So I keep trying to address my situation, how the people should talk different, how they shouldn't be thinking this, how they need to change, how this needs to happen. So I get very, very focused on these situations. There's really no power in your situation until you understand how your emotions are contributing to the situation. So a much more powerful thing is to say to myself, wait a second, why do I keep showing up in the same conversations over and over and over and over again instead of picking a new behavior? In other words, avoiding social media, avoiding certain people, avoiding certain conversations. But until we understand that we have a lot of influence over our emotional experience, but we have to come at it through a different angle.
Now, are we, as I'm hearing this sounds like one of those theories that could really open up the earth to us and tremendous power. Is it me or am I correct?
I think you're exactly right on. So one of the core premises of the book, Energy Rising, that I wrote is that life is painful. We all get our feelings hurt. We all get frustrated. We all get irritated. But one of the greatest forms of pain in our lives comes from the things that we do to ourselves. So, for example, I will feel one thing and then I will behave in the exact opposite direction. You have to understand that your brain really has three engines that are driving you through your life. You have an engine of thinking, you have an engine of feeling, an engine of emotion, and you have an engine of behaving. So these really are kind of power centers that are moving you through space and time. Now, what ends up happening is a lot of us start to feel something and then behave in the exact opposite direction. Let me give you some examples of this. So I start to feel very exhausted. My body definitely wants rest. So I feel exhausted, but then what do a lot of us do? We overwork. So instead of using my behavior to rest, I've now used my behavior to act against my emotion of exhaustion to overwork. Another great example that I see happen all the time is people want to speak up. They have something on their mind. They want to say it. They want to have a difficult conversation. They want to create something. So they have this feeling that they want to do something. What do they actually do though? They keep their mouth shut. In each of those moments, I felt one thing in my body and then this is not metaphysical, I used my actual neurologic energy to behave in the exact opposite direction. People, if you do this once, twice, 10 times in your life, no problem. But what people are doing across their lifetime is they're feeling one thing, acting in a totally different direction. And then the consequence of that is very logical. You start to feel exhausted. You start to feel burnt out. You start to feel anxious. So to your point, could this offer people profound change? Yes. And let me just say what I think the clearest definition of happiness is. The clearest definition of happiness or contentment or confidence is when you take these three engines, your thinking, your feeling, and your behaving, and they're all acting in alignment. That's what happiness is.
I was going to say, in fact, after going through your book and making my own notes, I put the word alignment, and I was going to ask you that question because that's what it sounds like. I just recently was with my wife in a hospital, and the people there were amazing. They did everything so well and seemed to be so happy that I said, this is a hospital I want to recommend to everybody because they just seemed to enjoy their job. They were never frustrated, and everybody seemed to know what they were doing and to be in perfect alignment. Is this kind of an example of what you're saying?
That's a wonderful example. And I think what happens too, if you want to take this to any type of system, whether it's your marital system or you just gave a great example from the workplace, nothing threatens us more than when people say they're going to do. So again, they're using kind of one engine to say one thing and then they behave in another, right? So if my husband, for example, says he's going to be home at 5:00 and then he rolls in at 7:00, that discrepancy is very hard for the brain to handle. And the brain is going to interpret that in a threatening way. Similarly, if you work for an organization where management is saying we really care about people, but then they're not communicating clearly, they're sending mixed messages, there's huge pay disparities, upper management is paid $1 gazillion and that. So people hate that kind of sort of discrepancy or that dissonance. So you're exactly right. It's like all systems work better when the sources of energy that create the system are working in harmony or are working in alignment.
Now, suppose to get that alignment, though, we have to be, I don't want to say mean or harsh, but we have to tell, and I'm going to set up a scenario, a coworker, and maybe we like to start our day with the work on our desk and to get going in the morning, and the coworker comes in, has coffee, and lollygags till about 10 o'clock, and then they start giving us the work that we need to keep the wheels going. It's frustrating because maybe I'm the one sitting there from 9 o'clock to 10, doing busy work. Should we address that issue? Are we better off doing that, or is that causing us pain by having a conflict with our coworker?
Yeah. So what I find, a couple of things is I'll sort of say two scenarios and we can kind of go from there. What I overwhelmingly find both in house, so I do a lot of work in relational systems, both at home and at work. What I will find is almost always the problem. And I think this is so hopeful and so empowering is people just have not clearly communicated what they're feeling. So in other words, to go back to your example of the coworker, maybe the coworker thinks I'm totally fine with it. Maybe I'm rolling in with a cup of coffee like, hey, Bob, how's it going today? Instead of being like, hey, Bob, I need to have a difficult conversation with you. I'm actually even a little bit anxious to have this conversation because I certainly don't want to hurt your feelings or offend you. But I'm struggling because I come in at 8 a.m. and I have to wait for you for 2 hours to get started. Is there people don't have powerful conversations like these. So as adults, I think one of the most powerful things we can do is really assume an awareness of our emotions and then think about how we're powerfully choosing behaviors that support that. I cannot tell you how many times people are not having clear communication. Why? Again, we're back at this idea of emotional pain. They're feeling something that they don't like. They're feeling scared. They're feeling intimidated. They're feeling anxious. They're feeling guilty. I could give you 1,000 adjectives, but I think you understand what I'm saying here. I'm not having powerful communication because at the core, I am unwilling to feel those feelings in my body. Do you see what I'm saying?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's okay. That's okay. But I have to understand there's a consequence for that. So what kind of breaks my heart, I'm most fundamentally a trauma expert. I treat a lot of trauma and stress and trauma, is that I think a lot of times we start to feel like we're victims. People aren't listening to us. Nobody cares about us. And that's a horrible, horrible feeling. What I think is so hopeful and so redeeming is to say, wait a second, is that really true? Or is there another lever in terms of my behavior that I can pull to help me show up more powerfully in my own life? One other thing about this is I'm not saying 100% of the time difficult conversations are received well, but I will tell you, if you have good intentions and you show up to a conversation and you language your own emotions, hey, I'm a little bit anxious. I certainly don't want to hurt your feelings. I really appreciate you. I got some difficult things to tell you. Can we talk? Number one, overwhelmingly, the person's probably going to respond okay. And number two, if they don't, why would you continue to stay in a relationship like that?
Excellent point. Now, you've really got us thinking. Before we go further, Dr. DiGangi, I'd like our audience to know that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest today is Dr. Julia DiGangi, DiGangi. Her book is Energy Rising. And Dr. DiGangi, could you tell us, is there a website where we can learn more?
Absolutely. Feel free to you'll find me quite easily on the web at drjuliadigangi.com. That's Julia DiGangi, DIGANGI.
Now, talking about what you were talking about, and I used a simple example, two co-workers who just had, a fictional daily problem with who does the work first, so the next one can do their work. But you deal with major companies, our government, presidential elections. Am I correct? And Ivy League professors, schools, etc. So the highest, both academic and visual profiles in our country. I'm pretty grateful for my career. Yes, I started my career in U.S. politics. I started at the White House and doing some U.S. presidential campaigns. And that's actually where I became very interested in human behavior and ultimately became a neuropsychologist. So we see this and we can use either the local sports show or politics, but you would think people, and these are smart people and they have experts like yourself coaching them, wouldn't they come together on these things and say, look, we're spending so much energy and time fighting about this. Can we divide it up some way or meet in the middle or go 70-30 on this one and I'll give you 70-30 on the next one? Is there some way other than your book, which is obviously just coming out, so maybe they didn't know this yet, but is there some way we can dive in and get people to realize this and kind of bring it out in their daily life? Absolutely.
That's part of the reason why I wrote Energy Rising, is to help people understand how to work with emotions, how to work with their own emotions, and then how to use their own emotion to influence other people. If I had to boil all of my work down to a single question, I would tell you that all of my work really comes down to this question. People come to me, parents, people who are in, romantic relationships, people in organizations, and the central question that they're all asking is, how can I get these people around me who matter a lot to me to behave differently so that I don't have to feel feelings I don't like to feel inside of my own body? In other words,
all of it. You hit the button. Exactly. Yes.
That's right. So that's the core. So we're basically saying, I need my husband to stop doing X so I don't have to feel like he doesn't care about me. I need my coworkers to start doing Y so I don't have to feel so frustrated. I need the people on social media to start doing A, B, and C so that I don't have to feel so enraged. Right. So we then, what happens though, and I think this is really important to understand, that neuroscience clearly shows us that emotion is a thing of contagion. So there's absolutely no way to go into somebody else's nervous system and say, okay, I need you to start feeling motivation, or I need you to start feeling enthusiasm, or I need you to start feeling more calm. Okay, so what then is the mechanism? So in neuroscience, we talk a lot about mechanism. What is the mechanism or the lever to help change the people around us? And the answer is we change ourselves. So when we change ourselves, this is not just kind of like, oh, that's a lovely, lovely idea. It's actually how relationships change. If I start to activate the emotion of motivation inside of me, I will become more motivating to the people who look to me. If I start to become more calm, I will invariably calm down the people who depend on me. A classic example of this is the parent-child relationship. I have little kids, so believe me, I understand how maddening they can be at times. But a lot of times the child will become dysregulated, yelling, crying, or just kind of, being a little bit scratchy in the way they're talking to the parent. And the parent will become very dysregulated too. So now you have the dysregulated child, now you have the dysregulated parent, and the dysregulated parent then tries to calm the dysregulated child by getting very agitated. Hey, you need to calm down. Susie, Jimmy, calm. Never in the history of people calming down has someone shouting calm down at you actually calmed you down.
You've got me laughing here, and I'm sure our audience is laughing too.
Well, but and believe me, easier said than done. I sometimes lose my emotional power myself. But if I'm serious about calming my child down, what I need to do is go in the basement, go in the bathroom, splash some cold water on my face, and think about my own emotional center. I have a little girl. The other day, she was very upset. It was starting to aggravate me because she was getting upset about, it didn't really make any sense. And I thought to myself, okay, she's actually distressed. If her mother starts speaking harshly to her, that's only going to stress her out more. So I went in the bathroom, I took 3 breaths, and I was like, this will pass much more quickly if I handle it emotionally powerfully. Took 3 breaths, regulated myself, went out there, got on my knees, and I looked her in the eyes and I said, oh, sweetie, tell me what's going on. Tell mama. The whole transaction lasted under 2 minutes. She calmed right down. If I would have went out there and been like, Claire Rose, come on now, it would have been a whole different night. So what I'm trying to communicate is that when we think about our emotions, relationships change. Because what a relationship really is, it's an energetic exchange between 2 people. You're kind of on this energetic seesaw. So if I change my emotional constitution, which then will change my behavior, it will change my thinking, it is impossible for the relationship to stay the same, right? Because if I weighed 50 pounds and now I weigh 70 pounds and I show up on the seesaw, the way the seesaw is that system's going to move, it's just the physics of relationships. It's invariably going to change.
Now, is that like saying to someone, though, I'm right-handed. For one day a week, you want me to do all the things I do left-handed, and I'm using emotion for it. So where I might react to someone cutting me off or someone at work who didn't get the paperwork to me by 11 o'clock because now I may have to stay later or work through lunch or something, is that the equivalent of trying to use the opposite hand? In other words, very difficult, or can people learn that through your system fairly easily?
Yeah, it's like learning. I love this analogy that you're making. And it's so interesting because in other domains, no one ever gets confused here, right? If you're like, hey, I want to learn how to code, or I want to learn how to speak Chinese, or I want to learn how to salsa dance or something, you would know that when you started, it would be a very cognitive exercise. It would be in neuropsychology, it was very frontal. Like I'm thinking about it. I'm constantly I'm kind of struggling through it. This is what learning is at its core. Learning is really about growing pains in a lot of ways. But if I commit to it, The brain is, you can kind of think of the brain like a muscle. The brain changes quite quickly when we're consistent with our effort. You need two things to change the brain. You need a certain amount of pressure and you need consistency. In other words, let's say I'm trying to get physically stronger. And let's say I'm just going to lift a half a pound. Well, I could probably lift a half a pound from here until kingdom come and not get stronger. I need to maybe lift a 10-pound dumbbell or a 20-pound dumbbell. There needs to be enough resistance to not injure me, but there needs to be enough resistance to put enough stress on the organism so the organism can grow. And then similarly, I need consistency. If I went to the gym once every 5 years, even if I had the best workout in the history of mankind, there would be little return. So it's kind of like this idea of Goldilocks, finding the right amount of sort of pressure or resistance and then committing. Do I have time to tell a story? Or
I'm going to ask you to tell it after the break. We have to take a brief break, but we'll come back and please give us the story then. Is that all right? Yeah. At this point in the show, again, I'd like to remind our listeners, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest today is Dr. Julia DiGangi. She is the author of the book, Energy Rising. And Dr. DiGangi, could you tell us the website once again?
Sure. You can find me at www.drjuliadigangi, and that's doctor just DR. And my last name is DIGANGI.
And we will get that from you again one more time before the end of the show. But now I interrupted you. You had a story you wanted to tell us.
So I think this is a very, very compelling story to show how possible behavior, basically not even just behavior change, how possible changing our lives are when we're willing to come into a new relationship with our emotions. So I mentioned I do a lot of work with trauma. I've done a lot of work with combat veterans. The story I'm about to tell is very extreme. And the reason I actually think it's a very powerful story is if this story is true at the most extreme forms of human pain, there's so much for us to glean for those of us who don't have this level of trauma in our lives. So this, a combat veteran came to see me and he had been back from his deployment for many, many years. Okay. That's a very important piece of this. And so I say to him, so tell me what you've been doing. Because a lot of times when people come to treatment, it's like a last ditch effort, right? Because basically they're trying to work it out on their own. So he comes and he says, well, his trauma happened in the context of a convoy. So he says, I don't drive anymore. So he's obviously not overseas. He's back home in sort of suburban USA. I don't drive anymore. I don't go to public places. I don't go to movies. His children were now grown at this point, but he became estranged from his children and his wife because one of the core symptoms of PTSD is irritability and anger. So he couldn't relationships weren't working for him. He had trouble at work. So basically I say to him, it looks like you're avoiding. You're avoiding people, you're avoiding places, you're avoiding opportunities. He's like, yes, basically that's true. And I said, well, is it working? And he says, no, my life is a shell of what it would be. Here's a very important point I want to make here. When we try to avoid pain, it's totally normal. We all do it. Pain feels bad. That's what pain is. But notice when I try to chronically avoid my pain, we try to do that because we think it's going to protect us. We think it's going to keep us safe. Notice, though, that chronic avoidance of pain almost always makes us sicker. Okay, so here's for years and years and years, avoiding, and all it's done is made his life worse. So I say, okay, here are the best treatments for this kind of emotional pain. The best, most evidence-based frontline treatments require us to process our trauma. In other words, tell the very story that we've been avoiding telling for all these years. So this treatment, which so your listeners know is called prolonged exposure, it has a very strong evidence base, asks the patients to tell the trauma in detail, to record themselves talking about the trauma, and to go home and listen to it over and over and over. So of course, this is very counterintuitive. At first, he's like, this is the craziest I've ever heard. Like, I've just told you, I've been trying. But, he's very courageous. And also, we have a lot of good evidence. And I think the evidence is compelling to people. So he's very brave and says, I'll give it a shot. Now, remember, he's been home for many, many years. Around week 12, and I tell this story in Energy Rising, week 12, he walks into my office, kind of holds the phone and wiggles it in front of my face and says, Doc, I can't do this anymore. So I say, have a seat. Tell me what's been going on. He says, I can't listen to this recording anymore because every time I listen to it, I fall asleep. Every time I tell that story, I get chills. This memory that had tormented him for years is now so boring, it lulls him to sleep. The reason I named energy rising is this. Our brains and bodies understand what to do with waste. We eat food, we pass it. We take in oxygen, we put out carbon dioxide. Every 27 days, our skin cells go. There seems to be something singular about emotional junk. We have emotions that rise up in our nervous system. And instead of just feeling the feeling that our nervous system is literally over 150 million years of evolution designed to feel, we shove it down, avoid it, distract from it, scroll on social media to get away from it. Well, you do that for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, you become emotionally constipated. You're filled with emotional junk. So then when your coworker is 10 minutes late, or your kid does something that's a little bit annoying, or somebody cuts you off at a stop sign, instead of responding with profound mental clarity, profound emotional power, we're pissed off, till next 2 weeks from now about some guy who cut us off at the stop sign. Why?
Exactly.
Because it's hitting our emotional junk. And so I called energy rising because in order to claim a powerful, satisfying, fulfilling life, we have to start feeling the feelings we're designed to feel.
And how long, if someone gets your book and goes through this, what is the process? Is it something that they can start doing like exercise in 2 or 3 days? Is it something they should expect to take 90 days or a year, or how long?
The question that, like anything, it matters sort of on who you are, what your experiences are, how much work you've done. But energy rising is broken down into, I call them 8 neuropsychological codes. So it's a very user-friendly book, lots of practical exercises, lots of good stories. So people can use it at their speed. But I have seen people kind of come back, obviously with the appropriate resources for each individual person. But change, I'm in the business of human change. I've seen it happen over and over and over again.
I love that. That sounds like the title of your next book, The Business of Change. You've opened up a new world to us. I think this is fantastic. Again, I want to remind our audience, our guest today has been Dr. Julia DiGangi, DiGangi. The book is Energy Rising. And give us the website one more time.
Absolutely. So Dr. Julia DiGangi.com. That's Dr. Dr. and DiGangi is Digangi.
Dr. DiGangi, thanks so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Bill.
I'd like our audience to know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.